Valerie, I'm going to hand over to you. We are just going to be all ears and, as usual, pen and paper at the ready to write down everything that you say, because it's going to be wonderful. So tell us about imposter syndrome, why it's real, and why is it not a superpower?
Yeah, thanks so much. And these are two trends. Anybody who's been paying attention to the conversation out there on imposter syndrome, which is suddenly everywhere, right? Everybody is talking about imposter syndrome. Everybody is an imposter syndrome expert. And there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about imposter syndrome. The two main narratives happening right now is that it's not real. And the other one is that it's your superpower. So let me start with it's not real. How many of you have seen or read the article in Harvard Business Review called Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome? That seems to be,
I've seen it.
Yeah, that seems to be the starting point where this narrative began, that imposter syndrome isn't real. And we need to stop telling women they have it, because it fundamentally, the argument is that it comes down to racism and sexism, institutional racism and sexism. We need to address that first instead of trying to fix women or fix people of color. So let me tell you where I absolutely agree. Two places I agree. Nobody should be telling anyone they have imposter syndrome. Let me just say that again. No one should be telling anyone that they have imposter syndrome. I recently posted about this, actually. There's a coach who uses as a kind of a test with her clients to see if they have imposter syndrome. And she says, would you rather give a presentation to 200 people or to 6 senior executives in your company? If they say the 200 people, she tells them they have imposter syndrome, which is absurd.
That's bonkers.
It's absurd, right? I mean, I worked in a corporate world, right? Giving a talk to senior executives, people who can control your job, is just a very different experience than speaking in front of 200 people. I love a big audience. I prefer a big audience. So it could be just a preference. So for all kinds of reasons, that's not how we test what imposter syndrome is. So we should not be telling people, oh, you've got imposter syndrome, when in fact, they could just be dealing with normal self-doubt, right? So let's be clear on what imposter syndrome is. It really speaks to having difficulty internalizing and really owning our accomplishments, chalking them up to things like luck, timing, connections, computer error, the sense that, oh, they just like me. So in other words, externalizing our accomplishments, believing other people don't think we're as intelligent, capable, competent, talented, qualified, as we think we are. And all of that leading to this fear of being found out, which is different than just understandable anxiety before getting up and giving a talk in front of 200 people or 6 senior executives. The other place that I strongly agree is that they are right. Imposter syndrome has been over psychologized. Mm-hmm. I think we need to step back and do more contextualizing and less personalizing. If somebody is out there teaching about imposter syndrome, coaching on imposter syndrome, leading workshops on imposter syndrome, and they're not connecting the dots between imposter syndrome and stereotypes based on race or gender, if they're not connecting the dots between the pressure when you are one of the first, the few, or the only to represent your entire group, then I think that they are being negligent. In other words, if they're solely viewing it through this lens of an internal experience, whether it's your, as some people frame it as, fundamentally, it comes down to you feeling unworthy, which I don't think that's Michelle Obama's issue, right? I don't think she's struggling with childhood wounds. I read her autobiography. I don't think that's happening. I mean, and can that be happening for some people? Absolutely. But I think we do need to view it through this broader societal lens. Where I disagree is I'm not a fan of trading this one singular track, which is it's all racism and sexism, and therefore we shouldn't even look at it, for this other, kind of singular track of just it's not real, right? It's just all an individual experience. It's that and more. I think they also need to kind of broaden that lens. I see imposter syndrome not just as something that primarily affects women or people of color. It is truly a broader diversity and inclusion issue. In a few ways. One is a sense of belonging fosters confidence, right? Common sense tells us a sense of belonging fosters confidence. So when you walk into a room, you choose a major at university, you walk into a workplace, a conference room, the executive level, in an organization, the more people who look like you, the more confident you feel. The more people who sound like you, the more confident you feel. But what if you have a strong working class or regional accent that society has decided doesn't sound as intelligent? Or what if you're doing business or you're studying in a language that is not your first language? I've spoken over 100 universities around the world, including at Oxford University. And I can tell you the biggest audience to always come are the international students, which makes sense, right? They've got the same pressures everyone else has, but they're doing it in another culture and often in another language. People with disabilities, people who are first generation professional or student, they're also more susceptible. So I think we have to broaden this understanding to look at other areas around diverse populations and understand that, whenever you belong to any group for whom there are stereotypes about competence or intelligence, you are going to be more susceptible to imposter syndrome. And on some level, certainly to different degrees, we all know what that feels like, right? How many of you have ever been the youngest person in a work environment and felt underestimated? How many of you have been the oldest person and felt underestimated? When I asked that question to Facebook employees, the 30-year-olds raised their hand, right? So it's all kind of relative. And none of us should be telling anyone where their imposter syndrome comes from. There was a woman who posted a comment to an article on my blog. She was a Black woman. She said, I don't feel like an imposter because I'm Black. I don't feel like an imposter because I'm a woman. For her, she said, I feel like an imposter because I'm, in her words, the old lady in class. She was getting a PhD. Now, if I was talking to her, I would also suggest the fact that she's getting a PhD in and of itself makes her more susceptible to imposter syndrome. Because we have to also, on the off chance we don't solve racism and sexism and the other isms tomorrow, right? We have to kind of keep going and help folks who are experiencing this. But also there's other reasons for imposter syndrome. Organizational culture itself can play a role in undermining our confidence. And that's very true in academia, which is the situation that this woman found herself in as a PhD student. It could be occupational. People in certain occupations are more susceptible. It could be, situational factors. So there's lots to consider there. Let me just give you a very quick example how organizational culture can fuel self-doubt. I was speaking at Stanford. All it said on my slide was, you work in an organizational culture that fuels self-doubt. And he raised his hand. He said, what if you're in a culture where there's a lot of shaming? I said, are you in medicine? And he said, yes. I did a podcast for the British Medical Journal, and there was a medical student on there and a resident. We would call them a resident in the US, a few years into her practice. And they were lamenting the lack of positive feedback through their whole process or process. See, I'm bilingual. And in medical school in the UK, what they were telling me is you take this final exam, and the best you can do, the highest grade you can get is no concern. Yeah. We have no concern about you, right? And on the one hand, I validate that they are right. I mean, that sucks, right? You're working so hard and you get no positive regard whatsoever. I said, on the other hand, it's important that you understand that even though you didn't know this was the culture you were signing up for when you decided to go into medicine, that's the culture. Why we need to understand it is so that we can, again, personalize less and contextualize more.
Yeah.
To really, of course, I feel like an imposter. So imposter syndrome is real. And I think the article ignores the real consequences of bright people dropping out of university or not scaling their business or burning out from overworking, overpreparing. I mean, there's so many behavioral aspects to imposter syndrome that are problematic. That's to dismiss it as not real, you're going to leave a lot of folks behind who genuinely need insight and perspective. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the narrative out there that imposter syndrome is a good thing. And it's even been called, our superpower. And you see a lot of CEOs talk about, why it's a good thing and therefore, why they want to keep it. So I jotted down, these are some of the reasons that are given for being our superpower. So I think there's 6 core ones. So in this kind of cluster it signals we're in a learning mode. It spurs us to be more fully prepared. It means we care, and it makes us creative. Simon, what's his name? The big famous thought leader, Simon
Sinek.
Thank you. Yeah, that was his recently. That it makes us more creative.
I saw that and had to stop and go, what?
Yeah, I mean, all of those things are more attributes of different qualities that may come as a package with imposter syndrome, such as ambition and, an interest to, expand yourself and expand your learning and curiosity. But that's riding alongside perhaps imposter syndrome, but not because of it, because you're going to see other people who have the same attributes who don't suffer from the limiting beliefs, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. To me, it's based on this false premise that says you have to have imposter syndrome with all the baggage that comes along with that to care, or to be in learning mode, or to be creative, or to be fully prepared. And that's why, I kind of keep going back to, let's be clear on what the definition of imposter syndrome is. So I think it sends this kind of dangerous message, like, don't worry about it, don't do anything about it, because you're going to lose your creativity, or you're not going to care about your work anymore. You're going to stop learning, which is just, absurd from my perspective.
I mean, that's about as ludicrous as telling someone not to do, an artist that, if you stop the substance abuse, you won't be able to create anymore, because those, you might create differently, but the genius is still there. It's not the drugs giving the genius, but it's weird.
Right. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Another big one is that it prompts us to work harder, to either prove ourselves, to avoid being complacent, or both. Adam Grant included that in his book. And what I think is so interesting, his book is called Think Again, and he has a whole chapter on why imposter syndrome is a good thing. And one of them, he says that it motivates us to work harder. There's an asterisk, and in little tiny letters, font at the bottom of the page, right? It's a kind of an afterthought, is basically saying that reaction was based on gender. And that for women, self-doubt often caused the opposite response, which was to pull back, not to work harder, but to opt out, drop out, not go on to graduate school, not finish your dissertation, not scale your business, not go for the promotion. The question I always ask, especially women, is there anybody who feels like you're not working hard enough right now? Right? Like, do I really need imposter syndrome to spur me to work harder? I don't want chronic self-doubt to be my motivation for working harder. And anything that is going to give value to half the population, again, is problematic.
I know that this stuff is being said, but actually when you hear it all put together in one big lump, you're like, what? What really fast? I know we're not asking questions now, but just something I do want to ask you when we come to the end is this thing about it makes us more creative. My understanding is that it stifles our creativity because our brain is busy doing something else. How can we be more creative if we're feeling anxious, lesser, smaller? But maybe you'll come to that. But if not, that's my question noted for later.
Sure. And I think for some people, you're absolutely right. This, if you're in a brainstorming session and you're anxious about not wanting to speak up because you don't want to sound stupid, which we've all been there, right? Like, you don't understand, or you want to share an idea, but you don't want to sound stupid. And then somebody shares our idea and they go, that's brilliant. Oh, that was my idea. So for a lot of people, overworking, over-preparing is one coping mechanism. Holding back, that kind of flying under the radar. So you're right, not being as creative as you might or contributing as much is another factor. Both of those behaviors work. What I mean by that they work is they do the job they're supposed to do. They help us to manage the anxiety of waiting to be found out and to actually avoid being found out. So overworking, over-preparing, flying under the radar, it might protect us from disappointment. It might help us avoid failure or humiliation. If we chronically procrastinate, we get time to do stuff we'd rather do. So all of these strategies, unconscious behaviors, they work. They do the job they're supposed to do, but always at a price, right? We pay a really high price for our protection. And I wanted to flag something. There was a kind of informal survey that was done at Stanford University in the engineering department. And what they found was amongst these were undergraduate students, the young men who identified with imposter syndrome. I can't remember how the question was posed, but basically, do you think that there is it's positive or negative, right? Imposter syndrome. And something like 27% of the young men said, yes, it's a positive because it causes them to work harder. Only 7% of the females said, yes, it's positive. 87% of the females said it was negative. And again, that's problematic because, especially young women in STEM, it's not causing them to work harder necessarily. It becomes proof that they are not qualified, capable, and they end up kind of opting out and dropping out these fears and anxiety. And I think that the biggest point that I want to make today, Shara and Melinda, is the other argument is that imposter syndrome is a good thing. Imposter syndrome is our superpower because it keeps us humble. This idea that you can either continue to feel like an incompetent imposter or you can be an arrogant jerk is a false choice. I think
Yeah,
there is,
and it seems another gendered one too somehow.
Yeah, it certainly can have that dimension to it as well. But I think for me, the larger issue is that why it's a false choice is that it ignores the fact that there is a third choice. And for me, the third choice is to become what I refer to as a humble realist. If you look at that common percentage that's thrown around, right, that 70% of people have had these feelings at one time or another, it kind of begs the question, what's up with the other 30? Well, some part of that 30 are narcissistic, arrogant jerks who think they know way more than they really know. So we don't want to be them. And that's who they're talking about in these articles. What they're ignoring is there's a percentage, a minority within that minority of 30% who we do want to become like, who are genuinely humble, but have genuinely never had imposter feelings. And what makes them different is that in the exact same situation where you and I might feel like an imposter, they're thinking different thoughts. But it's not a pep talk. It's not like you've got this and you can do it and you deserve to be here, all of which are true. But they think differently about three core things. One, competence and what it means to be competent. They have a realistic, sustainable definition and measures for their own competence. They have a healthy response to failure, mistakes, setbacks, and constructive feedback. Let's call it the way we see it, constructive criticism and how it feels. And they understand that fear and self-doubt go with the territory, and they normalize it. So when they don't confuse competence and confidence. So for all of those reasons, this notion that it's a superpower, I think, is dangerous and ignores the very real cost to individuals for imposter syndrome, but also to the organizational costs as well.
I mean, yes to everything, all of that. I love it. What I'm just thinking as you were describing these people who are not in the narcissistic jerk category and they're not in the humble or humble plus category. How do you think is it mental toughness? There are some people that are born far more mentally tough and resilient than others. Are they who you're describing? And how do you be that? Is it just luck? Is it just you haven't had anything happen to you in your life, or you've just always been like that? Do you know the answer to that? It might be a
I don't know if anyone knows the answer. I think, I often jokingly ask my audiences, how many of you were raised by humans, right? Because there's a strong connection between being raised by humans and imposter feelings.
Yeah, because we're flawed. We're all flawed.
Well, it's not about being flawed. Honestly, it's about the messaging. Very few families teach children to have a healthy response to failure and mistake making. Yeah. There's a wonderful book I recommend for parents called The Gift of Failure. Because as a parent, your instinct when your kid is struggling in school is to, help them and to want them to get that A or whatever it might be, without really understanding the learning value of mistakes. And very few of us got those kinds of messages. And that's why increasingly you see, I spoke at MIT to graduate students, and right after I was there, they had 3 very prestigious professors come in to talk about their 3 best failures and what they learned from them. I would invite people here to Google Princeton Professor Failure CV. Princeton Professor Failure CV. The guy posted his incredibly prestigious, obviously tenured Princeton CV, but he also posted his failure CV. The jobs he didn't get, the proposals that were knocked down, the conferences that didn't, journals he didn't get into, and so on. And it rocked the academic world because we think like success is like this, right? That's not success. Success is like this. It's up and down, but very, very few of us get those messages growing up. I mean, one of the exercises I love from Carol Dweck's book, she has a chapter on parenting, is the typical dinner time conversations with kids is, what did you learn in school today? To which they say, nothing. That's what we probably said, right? And she said, wouldn't it be more interesting and useful if every night, once a week, you went around the table and said, let's all talk about something that we struggled with, we failed at, or was a setback, and how we handled it. I'll start. So
I love that.
Modeled that.
Every evening I do the same thing. So how was your day? What did you learn today? Nothing. Thinking, great, I'm paying for this as well. It's not even for free. So it's a great question. And oh my goodness, I mean, I just absolutely love what you're saying about helping our children understand that not that it's okay to fail, it's okay to get things wrong, it's what you do with it, it's what you learn, but also not expecting to have everything go their way. I mean, I've got a daughter age 16 who expects everything to go her way, and you can watch her mood as it doesn't happen, just dip and ebb and flow. And I just sit back and let it go. I'm not trying to put it right because it's to do, I won't go what it's to do with, but it's just, she's got to learn. You don't get everything. Not everything works out your way. And sometimes you have to put in some extra effort. It's what you can learn from that. She doesn't quite see it yet, but she's going to love me for it later. I know.
I saw an interesting point somewhere on the interwebs this weekend, and it was making a suggestion for parents, but I think it can also be brought into the management space as well, where it's to get people to think about and recognize their own achievements more instead of belittling their achievements, which is something that people with imposter syndrome often do. It's instead of saying, after somebody does something really good, instead of saying, wow, I'm really proud of you, it's rephrasing it to, you must be very proud of yourself. So it's getting people to look towards, or encouraging, this context was for children, but I think it works for all ages, to look more towards, how do you feel about your achievement, and turn inward versus looking for outward recognition and appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's brilliant. And to mark these occasions with, big celebrations, small celebrations, so that they kind of land more. I want to add to that, though, because a lot of the advice you see out there is to make a list of your accomplishments. And I get it, especially early in your career, you want these reminders of things that you have accomplished and done well at. But two things: what happens when you look down the list and you realize, well, but I did have an incredible connection that helped me get that job? Or maybe you really were in the right place at the right time. Or maybe you do have a wonderful personality, right? As if likability wasn't a valid skill set, which it is. So I also encourage people to, because what they're going to do when they see this external factor played a role is they're going to then dismiss that accomplishment. Well, it doesn't really count, because when I would invite them to make a third column, which is, okay, yeah, you got a lucky break. Yep, you knew somebody on the inside, but what did you do to take advantage of that external factor that contributed? The other thing, I know a lot of folks say, like, keep a success folder and like go look at all your brilliant accomplishments. That's great, but I think the also where we really need to help folks is to learn how to see constructive feedback as a gift, and to seek it out. Because we can look at our accomplishments all day long. I mean, I think most people who feel like imposters, they know they've got accomplishments. There are folks out there with PhDs who are running corporations, right? They know, Tom Hanks knows he has an Academy Award, right? I don't think I should write that down. But what happens when you get a critical film review, for example, in Tom Hanks' case? So I think we also have to equally hard work on those other two areas, which is developing a healthy response to failure, mistakes, setbacks, and constructive criticism, and to normalizing fear and self-doubt.
Yeah.
We've got some comments that have come in. I was going to say, let's kind of buzz through these. Danny had mentioned, yes, it's the correlation, not causation view, when we were talking about the idea of imposter syndrome being the source of success. And Vanessa had said, motivation to work harder being a good point of imposter syndrome. It's strong disagreement from Vanessa and myself. It can be debilitating and paralyzing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
It's what often causes us to burn out, because we just keep going, and then we end up running out of energy. And yeah.
yeah. And Danny commented how failure is experience is what you get when you don't get what you wanted. Well, that's a very apt quote because it's true. It's like, you think about, well, last week our topic was innovation and encouraging innovation and managing people's expectations that to really make an advance, it's going to take a few tries. It's not really going to happen on the first go most of the time. And so we have to plan for that, and that having those setbacks is okay as long as we learn and advance from that.
And sadly, a lot of people don't even ever start, right? Because if their perfectionism is also, a hallmark of imposter syndrome. So they're waiting, they're tinkering and playing around with their business plan or their new product, but they never quite launch because it's not quite perfect. And the entrepreneurs I know, the very, very successful multimillionaire entrepreneurs that I know, their mantra is half-ass is better than no ass. You don't need to do a bad job. It's like you got to get version 1 out the door, and you can course correct as you go along.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. So, there's a course I'm on at the moment, which is run by a gentleman called Daniel Priestley from Dent Global. I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but one of the things he always says is just be directionally correct. Don't be perfect. Perfection is not going to exist. And going off tinkering, learning another skill, sitting on another course isn't going to make you any better. You've just got to go out and do it and get better on the job. And it's really sad when you see people who are crippled by it and they're so stuck behind their own barrier to just take a step out and do their thing. And then when they do, wow, it's liberating for them. But it's a real thing, isn't it? It exists. And it's important for us as individuals and organizations to notice this.
And Sarah, you mentioned getting more and more credentialed. And I see that a lot, running around, especially women, not uniquely, but I find women trying to get more credentials, more experience, kind of waiting until we feel like an expert or we feel like we know everything. And I do think we conflate competence and confidence. Mm-hmm. There was a study that found that in a leaderless group, people are more apt to follow the more confident person in the room over somebody who is as competent or maybe even more competent. People are drawn to that. And I the message I always give to women or anybody with imposter syndrome is you are already competent right now, full stop. Meaning you have what you need to achieve the majority of the goals you set for yourself in life. Not easily, not quickly, not without help. But I think a lot of us need to focus on, in addition to confidence, both feeling more confident, but also projecting confidence even when we don't 100% feel it.
Yeah. Absolutely true. And what's interesting is I've got some clients that I've just been working with through a program to build confidence, to build resilience, so that they can take control of the imposter syndrome type experiences that they're having. And none of them want to go, they don't want to show or tell anyone they were on the course, because they don't want to admit they have imposter syndrome. And it's down to this, they assume it's to do with competence. And just getting this message out, it is nothing to do with it. You're already really good at what you do. It's already there. It's just this mindset of, have I got the confidence not just to carry on and do it a little bit better or more, but to portray that to other people and let them know you're confident. Can I ask you another question? Because I get asked a lot about, well, isn't it just more that introverts have it than extroverts? And yeah, I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but I'd love to hear it from you. What would be your answer to that?
Well, I'd have to go back and look at the research. I think people forget that this is heavily researched topic in academia. So I'd like to know what the studies say. My hunch is that the behaviors might be more specific to introverts versus extroverts. So for example, one of the coping mechanisms, if you're introvert, it might be more natural for you to not speak up in class or not raise your hand in a meeting or not, want to go make that presentation or go for a promotion because you are more introverted. So that might feel more like a more natural response. But certainly there are a lot of extroverted people who are very famous and well known, particularly in creative fields, who, they just use a different coping mechanism, whether it's overworking, over preparing, or, chronic procrastination or self-sabotaging. So I think it can show up in different ways. It's not just because people are introverted.
It's a separate thing, isn't it? It's just, I mean, I as someone who has, I am a delighted user of imposter syndrome myself, I'll put it that way, but I've got it under control. But I'm a massive extrovert, and people just look and go, how can you say you've got or had or coping with imposter syndrome? It's nothing to do, it's just how we portray it. And I'm really glad to hear that from you. And of course, yes, there's evidence that we can look at to prove exactly, but it just doesn't make sense to say that it's because of a behavioral preference. It's the portrayal of it that's different, not the fact that you've got it or not.
And some people might use personality as a coping mechanism, right? If I can kind of laughing and dazzling them with my personality, they won't notice I don't, in their mind, that they don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
I want to make sure I connect a dot here. And because I want to go back, we started out talking about the Harvard Business Review article saying it's not real. It's, I don't want to say just racism and sexism, but that's, kind of the gist of it. There is I want to say there is a social component. So you're sitting in the meeting and you don't want to speak up because you don't want to sound stupid. To me, I always say the key is not knowing everything. The key is to not know with confidence, right? To be the person who says, excuse me, I don't understand. Can you explain that? Do you mean this or that? The reality is, if you're the only woman in the room, you're the youngest, you're the person of color, you're the person with a disability, might you feel more vulnerable not knowing? Absolutely. But the point I also make is that none of us have any control over what anyone in that room thinks of us. We can only control our response. And that's why I wanted to come from kind of the depths of our soul, right? That we believe we have just as much right to fall flat on our face as the next person, or to ask a so-called stupid question, or to not know the answer.
Yeah, it's a great point. We've got some
comments to come through. Jay has been saying, I believe the key skill here is learning how to reflect. If you can't reflect, you will not be able to turn failure into experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
And following on from that concept, Jay says, be perfectly imperfect. He's learned that last week. There must be a story there.
Well done, Jay.
And Kimberly is saying exactly, it becomes essential to celebrate the positive parts of any failure. Nothing is ever a total loss. There are always small victories within each failure.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I fail regularly. I fail proudly and loudly because I'm expressive, and everyone knows about it. And then they all know what I've learned from it as well. That's the way I roll, and I'm sticking with it.
But it's not how most people look at it, which breaks my heart, because they drop out of school. They don't follow through. I was speaking at University of British Columbia, and a young man comes up to me and he says to me, I only believed half of what you said. And I said, okay, I'll bite. He wanted to tell me something. He failed his qualifying exams at Oxford to get the PhD. And I said, well, that sucks. Right? That sucks. What'd you do about it?
Yeah.
He had 6 months to go back and take it again. Right. So it's never about the failure. It's what we do with setbacks and failure and difficulty, to your point, that really matters.
Yeah. A great point to end on. We've just got a few minutes
about
left.
4 minutes left. 3 minutes left. Sorry. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us, Valerie?
The final thought would be that what everybody wants, which I understand, what everybody wants is to stop feeling like an imposter. I used to give my audiences 10 things that they could do. And then somebody would raise their hand and go, oh, this is great, but is there anything else we can do? And I'm like, well, of the 10 things I just gave you, what have you tried? Or in the evaluation, they would say, oh, it's really good, but I wish you had told us more things we could do. Well, maybe should I give them 20, 80, 100? Like, what's a good number of things? And then I realized that what they wanted was to walk in the room feeling like an imposter and walk out of the room not feeling like an imposter.
Yeah.
And it's not how it works.
And nobody can do that for you.
right? The only way to stop feeling like an imposter is to stop thinking like an imposter. And I'm going to repeat, fundamentally, it comes down to having a realistic, sustainable understanding of competence and a healthy response to failure, mistakes, criticism, and normalizing fear and self-doubt, and to stop over personalizing and to do more contextualizing.
Beautifully, beautifully put. Thank you so much for joining us, Valerie. You've absolutely made my day. It's been wonderful having you on the show, and yeah, congratulations to you for all the, everything you've done, creating the institute as well, to helping raise the awareness of this really important and quite debilitating thing for a lot of people who feel stupid because people tell them it doesn't exist. So and good luck with renaming the book and keeping the Amazon reviews going.
Do you have a target date for when the new edition of your book will be re-released?
I don't right now. They're telling me spring, but I don't yet have a target date. But
Okay.
thanks for asking.
We'll keep an eye out for it. But for those of you who've joined us today, thank you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed today, and I'm sure you've learned plenty, as we all have. And join us again next week. We'll be back to the normal time of, what is our normal time? 12:30 UK time. And we will be talking to, I don't know if it's Melinda or Vanessa. Somebody's going to have something amazing to share with us. So come and learn, and we shall see you all next week. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a wonderful evening, and take care.
Thank you for joining, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks.
See you next week.
Thank you.